fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. Who else is on this podcast, this video podcast?
Luke Simons, over here.
Like diamonds.
Tony Acevedo, over here.
Like avocado.
Somewhat.
Guys, we just got finished with an inner circle call. Some of you might be saying, what the heck's inner circle? Well, this is our second time doing it. It's a year-long program. It can go longer if you like it to. And it's where we get on a weekly call with our inner circle members and get on maps and literally show you where to go fishing based on everything that's going on with the temperature and the wind and all that great stuff. It is, it's always interesting, the game of golf, right? Similar to fishing, meaning, most of us are playing golf not to win money, but because it brings us enjoyment and we get to be outside, et cetera. Same with fishing, right? Most of us aren't trying to go pro at it. And with golf, if you want to get better, there's an easy way to do it that most people do. And it's not like an embarrassing thing to do is you hire coaching, right? You go to a pro, you find someone who is a golf coach. There's thousands of golf coaches, and yet fishing, didn't have that. And I think we're kind of filling in that gap between hiring a guide every day, which would cost you $700 a day, which is, I don't know, $40,000, $50,000 a year. And just trying to learn everything the hard way. And that's what our inner circle does. It's invitation only. You have to be an insider to even get invited. So if you are an insider, shoot Carol an email. And the best way to get her is just that fish@saltstrong.com, fish@saltstrong.com. She can get you an invitation to the inner circle. And if you're not an insider member, what the heck are you waiting on? I think by the end of this call /podcast/video, you will be a member. And the reason why is we're going to talk about the number one reason that most all fishermen fail, including the three of us on this call, including pretty much every angler that we've ever had on this show at some point was failing because of this. And most of us, including me looking back, we never would admit to this because in our mind, like, oh, that's not me, that's someone else. And yet even today, find myself falling back into the same problem/pattern. And we're going to talk about the problem here in 1 second. We're going to talk about what's going to happen if you don't fix it, and then ultimately how to fix it. Like show some really cool tools that you can be getting completely risk-free here that will help you explode just how many fish you catch and how many tight lines that you're getting. And so here's the problem. Here's the reason that the majority of fishermen are failing. And it's because they keep going back to the same handful of spots. That's it. I mean, Tony and we all talked offline, and Tony said when he first started, he was a bass guy. Like a lot of us, ex-bass fishermen start getting into saltwater fishing. They find one spot and like, oh, cool, I caught a nice redfish there. I'm going to keep going back there. And then maybe one more spot. And all of a sudden it's like three, like we're capped out. Oh my gosh, I got my 3 spots. I'm good. And guess what? Tony kept fishing the same 3 spots for a couple of months. And next thing you know, dude's frustrated. It's because fish move. They have fins and no fences. Fish are going to be moving. They move every single day, and not to mention every single season. They're moving drastically, but every single day, every tide cycle, these predator fish that we love to catch are moving. And so that's going to be the focus of today's podcast/YouTube is getting more spots. Spots are your problem, and we want to give you more of them. Right, Lukey?
Well, but specifically, it's type of spot trumps a GPS spot.
Yes.
Right. So it's the key, and I still even fall into it. But for years, and I'll show you an exact spot in particular that was our first time we ever caught a slam. Joe, I remember Dennis Oss took us out, and he's an ex baseball player. He's an avid fisherman. Took us out to some spots. One in particular, we caught our slam, first slam ever. We were super pumped. Because we grew up bass fishing, and at least my bass fishing spots, I feel like freshwater fish don't move nearly as much as saltwater. I mean, like saltwater, the tides are moving constantly. And I never would make huge changes on my bass spots from like one day to the other, or even throughout the day. But with saltwater, right, you have changing tide cycles and the winds. A lot of the biggest fish are up in the shallowest water, but that shallow water is very prone to getting totally changed on a wind change or a cold front, like a temperature change. That shallow water is very prone to going from very comfortable to the fish to very uncomfortable to the fish, and they're going to move accordingly. And so if you're not putting yourself in the right type of spot based on the conditions, you are almost guaranteeing inconsistent results. And again, we know that from experience because it was years and years of frustration. And it finally, I guess we were a little bit stubborn, but it took us a long time to finally at least acknowledge that. And then it took even more time to start putting the pieces together on what type of spot to go to based on the specific conditions. And
part of it, Luke, was just having a couple of those days, because back then we're also held hostage to live bait. And, if you're having a tough day of getting live bait and you get out there a little bit later, you sleep in, and all of a sudden everyone is already, like, especially on a Saturday, right? Everyone's already in your spots. And we're like, okay, I will go to the next one. Someone's already there. We'll go to the next one. And we were like a lost kid at Disney. We're like, what do we do? And some of that almost forced us to go out there and explore a new area. And we realized, well, doggone, this is pretty fun. And talk about rewarding when you do find a brand new spot on your own that's loaded with fish. And the cool part is it's super predictable. I mean, I'm not going to ever say it's just simple that you can do it every single time and you're going to catch an inshore slam every time you go out there. But I know Luke and Tony, you guys fish a whole lot more than me, so you have a little bit more proof of this. But I mean, you could go 100 trips in a row and at least just know you're going to get tight lines, right? And that's really what most of us are after, is just that knowing confidently, especially if we have kids or friends with us, that we can put people on fish. And that's what we're going to talk about here today.
Yeah, and the worst part was, and you touched on a little bit, Joe, is that we, at that time, first of all, I had that one spot from Dennis, and we'll show it in a second, and then we kind of picked up a few other spots here and there that we were catching fish on, and so we were just like, oh man, we have like a half dozen spots now, we're good, we're good, we're catching slams every trip, and it just flat out didn't happen. And then when you only have 6 spots, and somebody's in 1 or 2 of them, right? If you don't get an early start and somebody beat you to it, that wrecks the day. Or oh my gosh, I just remember being so frustrated.
And you're mad at the person too for being
in your spot.
That
jerk, right? The nerve of him going to my spot, and totally ruined the day, wrecked the day. And now okay, great. When it's about type of spot, now you have an infinite amount of spots to go to, an infinite amount of potential spots to go to, that are most likely going to be good as long as you have the right trends dialed in. And so now somebody's in one spot. Okay, cool. I'll just go around the corner. There's a similar spot right around the corner that I've already identified because I had an effective pre-trip plan. Somebody's in this one spot. Okay, no problem at all. Let's go to the next one. Now I have not had those times where I'm just oh my gosh, I hate this guy. The nerve of getting there faster. Now it's okay. Whatever. There's a ton of other similar spots that I can go to that are more than likely going to be just as good, if not better.
And you seem calmer. You haven't slung a weight at anyone in a while. So,
yeah. Well, for the record, I've never done that in particular. But it just makes fishing. Nobody fishing. For at least most of us, is just our favorite thing to do. It's a favorite hobby, and it's just not good when the hobby causes frustration, especially something that you can't control. Somebody gets there sooner. Again, if you're doing it properly, you should have enough potential spots to go to where if there's somebody else in 1 or 2 of them, it's no big deal at all.
Yeah, well, pull up that map, and then Tony, we've been hogging up the mic here. Talk about your story real quick. Why Luke looks up on the map and kind of your experience with doing the same thing that really, 99.9% of us fall in the same trap.
Yeah. So back when I started inshore fishing, that was 2015. So spring of 2015, that's when I got my first kayak, and I decided to finally start inshore fishing. I mainly bass fished pretty much my whole life, and the problem I had was, like you said, I just had a handful of spots. I don't even think it was 3 spots now. I think it was like 1 or 2 that I just went to every weekend, just because I went online, which most people do, and they type in what's a good spot near me. And I found one, went there quite a few times, only caught very small trout. Pretty much every trip, couldn't figure out why. It looked like a good spot. But after after I found you guys, that's when I really dug into like reading the maps and just reading what the conditions are, because with inshore waters, they're very shallow, and the environment plays a big role on where those fish are going to be. The environmental factors, the wind, the tides, water levels, water temperature, the sun position, that can really determine where those fish are going to be, because it's such a shallow environment compared to the ocean, where you have 200 feet of water and a rock pile, and those fish will sit on that one little rock pile for weeks, months, and possibly even the entire year. So spots for inshore are definitely not the same as spots for offshore, like GPS spots. So I quickly figured that out, and once I did, I started catching a lot more fish. Like I said, when you only got a handful of spots, you're really limiting yourself. You have to go out there and explore, like you said, Joe. Explore new areas, catch fish in new areas, because that's going to definitely increase your confidence when you go to new spots. And like Luke was mentioning about just your mindset, if you go out there and you get frustrated, if you have a handful of spots and you go and see that there's somebody in that spot when you get there, don't get frustrated. You really have to be relaxed when you're on the water, because if you go out there and you have a really bad mindset, you get in a bad mood, it's going to throw off the whole day. So just being able to pick out those types of areas, those types of spots, and finding those types of spots instead of just having a handful of exact locations, it's definitely going to help you out when you're out there on the water.
Yep. And real quick too, if you feel like we're picking on you, we're not. We've been in your shoes. And two, it's not your fault. And here's what I mean. Luke mentioned on the bass side of things, and that's one story. And then on the saltwater offshore side, we actually started off as bass guys who grew up in Central Florida, lived on a lake, and then we started doing offshore fishing pretty heavily for a while. And that really is kind of spot specific. And so when we finally moved inshore, our minds, just because that's all we had known is, we just need a bunch of spots. So we bought all those spot maps, right? And the truth about the spot maps is they're okay. They give you a guide of what areas could be good. But what's interesting, and like, Tony and I have talked about this offline, some of the spots that he did find in the beginning were actually really good spots for like one specific scenario, and they absolutely sucked the other half of the year. And a GPS spot, like if someone at a marina or a tackle store, your buddy gives you a spot that he fished or she fished yesterday and it was on fire, I mean, the very next day, because weather has changed or a front comes in and the wind direction is different, that spot can be completely blown out and gone. And I think that's what we all tend to forget is, these are just like evergreen spots. They're going to keep producing forever. And I caught one there yesterday, so the fish are going to be waiting on me today. And that's not the case, unfortunately. And once again, it's not your fault. And the even better news is it's easier to solve than you think it is. And that's what we want to spend the rest of this webinar, podcast, video going over is how to solve that. And I think first Luke's got the map up and you're going to show that one area that we thought was our holy grail and turned out to be a good spot during one specific time of the year.
Yeah. And so the number one thing to keep in mind is that the spots you fish need to be dependent on the actual conditions of when you're fishing. So the biggest mistake I see on like online forums and stuff is, hey, like I'm going to pick an area. We'll say Boca Grande in this case. Going to Boca Grande, where should I fish, right? And they don't say when they're going. They don't say what day they're fishing, and they definitely don't mention anything about like the wind speed or wind direction or the tides or anything. And people are saying, you have to go here or there. In this case, it's Three Sisters, but this Three Sisters area is really good sometimes. But in other situations, it's terrible. And for years, this was like one of our 6 spots. And we had some really good days there. We had some surprise, caught a lot of slams there. But we had just as many, if not more days where we got totally skunked. We got nothing. We had not a bite at all, or just caught catfish. And we really never thought about, obviously we thought about the tides, like that's what everybody thinks about, which is a factor, but we never really thought about like the seasonality or the wind and how they all interrelate. And so if you're not yet doing that, the number one takeaway from this is to start doing that. just to start thinking more than just tides. It's really about the weather and even the trending weather. Is it getting hotter? Is it getting colder? And so this area in particular, for those who are watching, you can see it. And for those who haven't yet seen this is smartfishingtides.com. This is a site that we created to put all this stuff together for you. As Tony mentioned before, it's really about the tides, the weather. This has everything. We even give hourly feeding projections on throughout the day, what statistically will be the best time of day to fish based on all of the known information. So we have hourly wind speed, direction, the temperature. Long story short, if you aren't yet using this, definitely give it a shot. It obviously has the tides as well. And on here as well, you can see radar, and then we're looking at the satellite map feature on smartfishingtides.com. So we're zoomed in here. This area is called Three Sisters, and it was right in this little cove. This was actually before this big old dock was built. And I remember coming here, Dennis, came over here. We had some live bait. We anchored down like just off of this shoreline. What we have is a grassy bay, a bay with grassy bottom that has a shelf that gets shallower and shallower and shallower and goes up to the shoreline. The shoreline has that's probably 30 yards of sand, and then the grass starts, and then it just starts getting just a little bit deeper and deeper and deeper. And there's a decent amount of current. If we'll zoom out, you can see it's not like in the main current flow, but it's close to it. Like here's the main current flow. It's close to main current flow. And I can't remember what season we were here, but we got here and we caught red, we caught multiple redfish, a bunch of trout, and a couple snook. And I just remember that was our first time ever catching a slam. And we were trying for like years to catch, like for years of frustration on catching slams. We've obviously caught all three, but like just getting them all together in one day and specifically one spot was like kind of the holy grail. And it finally happened. So like we were high-fiving, okay, great. We finally have a spot, but we'd come back here again and again, and again. And some days it'd be great, but in many days it would be total bust. And again, it's because either the season or the wind would change and make it totally different. So just for an example, right? It's wintertime now, so we'll give a winter example. So as far as the seasonality, in wintertime, especially after a cold front like we just had, fish are just looking for warmth. And so wind protected shorelines and actually in areas that don't have a ton of moving water is actually really good, right? But in the summertime, that would be the total opposite. So after cold front, on a cold front day, winds ripping from the north, which is typically the case, is that this little cove right here is statistically going to have the most fish because the water is going to be just a little bit warmer than everywhere else, right? So what you're looking for is a little bit of water temperature that's just a little bit warmer than everywhere else. So the fact that it's wind protected means that cold air overnight just can't really impact the water as much as it would on an area with like a bunch of waves. That's just it's more just surface area, right? That the air can actually penetrate into the water much more easy on the wavy side versus the calm side. So just that alone, just applying that one little factor, that tiny little factor, it seems small, but it is shocking how much of a difference that actually makes. So in a cold, harsh winter, post-winter, cold front wintertime day of fishing, this little cove would be really good. But on a hot day, right, in the middle of summer, and the fish aren't looking for warmth, right? And the science of in case you don't know, the actual science application of this, and we go into more detail in the courses we have on our site. But the science is, as water gets hotter and hotter, the dissolved oxygen content gets lower and lower, and dissolved oxygen is what fish use to breathe and for energy. And so, as the water is getting super warm, the fish are getting less comfortable, right? They can't breathe well. They have less energy, so they're not going to sit there and take it. They're going to go move to somewhere where there's more dissolved oxygen, where they feel more comfortable. So in the same exact spot, right, the same wind speed, the same wind direction, this spot is going to be a bust because it's the wrong season. So long story short, this one, GPS spot can be great some days and it can be terrible the other days. And if you don't know the reasons behind it, then you're going to be like us for many, many years on having a lot of just skunk days when all you have to do is make one little change and it will totally change everything.
And our mindset, once again, was probably like a lot of you, that was such a productive spot, and it produced for us off and on, but we never put it all together. And I still remember a day that was me, you, and Dad, and it was kind of a hike from where we were, put our boat in and stuff. Anyways, even get there, and we finally get there, and it's brutal hot. It's like a July or August day, and we're just sweating like crazy. We're in that little cove right there fishing those docks. And I'm talking like no CMs are out. There's no breeze back there, and it was brutal. And we got skunked. After a while, we're so mad. Like, where did the fish go? And so let's talk about that. Like, where if this is not, or if this is a good spot now, or a bad spot in the summer in those certain conditions, what's the answer? What are you doing differently today?
Well, today I'm factoring in the variables, right? Obviously the season will determine which variables I actually care about and which ones I don't. It'll kind of change the priority on which one's which. And I factor in the wind heavily, the tides heavily as well. But like the wind is almost like just as important as the tides, in my opinion now. And obviously the season, but just really the recent trend. So, there's not like a perfect, a scientific approach. A lot of it is art. And a lot of it is having time on the water. Right? That's how the fishing guides can just statistically catch the most fish most consistently, is because they're on the water every day, or at least most days. And so a part of it is just being on the water and knowing the recent trends. But, those trends are only as good as the weather is consistent. As soon as there's a weather change, those trends will totally, totally change. And if you don't know how that change of weather impacts the trend, you're gonna guess wrong, or you're gonna be flipping the coin if you're on point or not. So what I'm doing now is really factoring in the recent trends and then the known weather coming up on the day that I'm fishing. And if there's a change in the weather, then I'm not going to follow the recent trends, because I know there's going to be a change. I'll change the plan accordingly. But if there's no change at all, I just follow whatever has been working lately and just apply it to the next trip. So, and what I've found is that the times I've struggled the most, like the days where I've had the hardest time going out and catching fish, is when I'm fishing my home waters and I get back into the spot mentality, because it's just like our natural instinct to go somewhere where you have confidence. And it's easier to be confident in a spot that you've caught fish before than where you haven't. And I found that part of my job is to go to new spots every week, and I film it. I film the pre-trip plan just like this, where I get on the map, look at the weather, look at the tides, talk about the recent trends, and then apply it to the next trip. And then I go to an unknown area, I record it, I obviously fish it, record it, and then share what worked and what didn't, like what part of the trends worked, what part of the plan worked, and what part didn't work, and then how to learn a lesson from that for the next trip. So I do that every week. In those trips, even though I'm fishing in areas I've never been to before, it is shocking. It's been surprisingly how effective those days have been, because I cannot go back to the number one mistake, as far as I don't have any spots that I love. Like, I don't have any spots that trump my thought process of looking at the type of spot, because I don't know any spots, right? Like, totally going in blind. And those days are surprisingly good. And then the times where I go back to my home waters and, I know the conditions are a little bit different than they should be, but I really like this spot, and I go there and I don't catch anything. And I wasted an hour or 20 minutes or however long that is. It's impossible. Like, that mindset is always there. And so it's almost good to just go to totally new territory and apply this stuff, because it is surprising how effective it works, as long as you don't get, you don't let that GPS spot mentality mess things up.
Yep. And I don't know if this is for you, but we've actually been doing a 10-minute video every week. And this is for our insiders only, where we get on a map just like this and break down, like literally show you based on the trends, based on the weather, where to go fishing every week. And that's kind of the little tag phrase of it is we show you exactly where to fish every single weekend in 10 minutes or less. And if you want to know more about that, it's at smartfishingspots.com. So Smart Fishing Tides is where all that tide and weather and sonar and radar, all that is. And Smart Fishing Spots is a special deal that now all of our insiders get it. It's part of the package for our existing insiders. If you join here in the Smart Fishing Spots, you'll get all of it together, Insider Club, the Smart Fishing Spots, etc. So go check that out at smartfishingspots.com. It literally takes all the guesswork out of it. So if you don't have time to study maps for an hours upon hours before you go fishing, and you want someone just to kind of tell you where to go fishing based on the trends, I mean, not the GPS spot, but say, hey, here's the kind of spots you want to look for and get on a map, then go check that out at smartfishingspots.com. Tony, I'm sorry, keep going, Luke.
I was going to say I'm on our website now, the main site, saltstrong.com. So everything is on Saltstrong. The Smart Fishing Spots kind of summarizes it all. But on here you can see the Smart Fishing game plan. So every week, it's every Friday. Here we go. It's like the Cliff Notes of a fishing forecast, right? So every week, quick 10 minutes or less video talking about the recent trends, and then showing the weather projections for the weekend, and then just putting it all together. And this is like the quickest and easiest way to know that you're going to be dialed into the right stuff and not wasting your time in the dead zones. So cool. Here's where those posts are.
So Tony, I want to flip it back to you. Talk about what changed. Obviously, you joined the Insider Club. From what I could tell, it was pretty game changing from a guy who was a recovering bass fisherman to kind of going back to one spot, maybe two, and maybe catching a couple trout. And now I don't know what the number is, because it'd take a pretty big calculator to count how many redfish and speckled trout and snook and flounder and stuff that you've caught. But what changed, and what are you doing differently now?
I think the biggest change that I made was just, getting outside of my comfort zone, going to new spots. And especially after I joined you guys, I'm doing the same thing Luke's doing. I'm going out and going to new spots and filming it, showing what I was doing, what was working, and when. And just by going to new spots, catching fish in new spots, finding fish in new spots, it definitely boosts your confidence level. So when you do go to pick another new spot, you know what you're looking for, when you should be going there, what you should be using, and it's going to definitely increase your results. I mean, now I've got, probably over 100 spots in just one little area, and I can filter through those spots throughout the year and go to the ones that produce based on the conditions. So keeping a log of what you're doing, when you're catching fish, where you're catching fish, what the conditions were, that's definitely going to help out. I'd have to say the biggest change I made was just getting outside of my comfort zone and exploring, going to different spots, and just understanding the behavior of fish under different conditions.
So let's say you fish a lot of Titus Fill. Let's say you're going completely somewhere new. Let's just say Jacksonville, a couple hours north or so. What do you do in the pre-trip planning? What are you looking at? Is it wind? Obviously, talk about what you're looking for on satellite maps. What's going through your head?
Yeah, like for example, the past 2 weeks that I've went out, I've been finding fish on a western shoreline. Right now we're in the wintertime, so I've been fishing shorelines that are on the west side of the river or of the bay. They typically get hit by the sun first in the wintertime, so those areas are going to be a little bit warmer. Also, they're usually going to have that wind protection, so I'd be looking for areas similar to that I have been fishing when I'm looking for new spots. So that's where it comes down to just applying what's working for you where you're at to a newer spot. That way you can get on those fish.
Cool. And in terms of wind, Luke had mentioned that that's like a really important factor for him. What do you think?
Say that again.
Wind.
When, as far as?
No, wind. Like the wind is blowing through your hair right now.
Gotcha. Yeah, the wind direction is definitely going to play a huge factor, depending not even the direction, but just the wind speed, especially in the winter versus summer, or how I like to break it down, the warmer periods versus the colder periods. The colder periods, I'm looking for the wind protection. In the warmer periods, I'm looking for areas that are getting a little bit stirred up because it's going to help aerate that water in the summertime and in the warmer months. So it'll help cool it down, just like Luke was saying with the dissolved oxygen. In the summertime, you want to look for those areas that are, the water's moving, it's getting churned up, it's cooling down, it's getting aerated and oxygenated. And just the opposite in the wintertime. The water is cool enough that it doesn't need that wind to aerate it to help oxygenate it. What you want is a nice, calm, flat area where that sunlight can penetrate through the water and help warm up that area, because that's going to be comfortable for the bait, and it's also going to be comfortable for the fish. So definitely looking for wind protection in the wintertime and a little bit of wind in the summertime.
And it's better for the angler in the wintertime, having the calmer.
In the summer.
Definitely easier to fish out of the wind.
Yes.
Yeah, do you remember all those days we sat in those coves in the summertime, just totally baking in the sun, and there's no wind, because we caught a lot of fish there like a couple winters ago, and we just be getting just crushed by the sun, hot as can be, and that's not generally they're going to be the best spot to go to, especially if there's no current. The water's going to be hot. The fish are going to be out of there. And,
I ended up getting melanoma, and I blame it a lot on those spots, and I tried to contact Morgan & Morgan to see if we could sue the spot, but apparently that was outside of all realm of law. So I'm kidding. I'm not trying to sue a spot. So what else, Luke? Any other big idea? Oh, I see someone's pulling up Sebastian Inlet. Oh boy.
Yeah. So I just wanted to touch on this a little bit. If you live in Florida, or if you've been to Florida, I'm sure you've heard of Sebastian Inlet. It's a really good spot. However, it's not always a good spot, even from season to season, even just time of day and the tide. That's one of the biggest things that I found to be quite a determining factor, especially around inlets and passes. They hold fish pretty much year round, and the biggest factor is going to be something as small as the time of day or the tide, like I said before. So I've fished here quite a few times. When I first started fishing over here, pretty much just winged it. Just went out there, didn't care about the tide, didn't care about the time of day. Just went out there, started fishing, and got skunked a handful of times. Then I go home, I look online, and I see pictures of people posting, massive snook, massive redfish. And it's like, okay, those fish are there, but they obviously weren't eating when I was there. So just networking with people, trying to figure out when the best bite is, and just that experience out there on the water is definitely going to help as well, just so you know when the best times are. And another thing are the tides. Sometimes in these inlets and passes, what the tide station says can be completely off, just because of, how far the inlet is, or how, let's say, how big the inlet is. If it's very narrow, if it's very wide, you're going to have water flowing at different times. So it's not going to be exact to that actual tide station. So there could be a delay. And again, just by networking with people, you can get a better understanding of when that tide's going to change, as opposed to looking at the actual tide chart. So the tide charts are handy, but you do have to just be in a network with people to get a better understanding of when the best type of time or tide or time of day is to fish a spot. And another thing with the insider group is the community. We have a community of, we have over 11,000 members now. Yep. And you can basically ask people, when is the best bite? I'm going to this area. When's the best time to go out here? If you don't have that time to get out there on the water, which definitely helps. So it could be a very popular spot, but if you don't know when the best times to go there, you're going to have yourself a tough time on the water.
Yeah. I saw 70 people, 70 joined just yesterday alone. If you guys saw that email from Carol, it's awesome.
Nice.
Luke, anything else on your end?
Yeah, and Tony hit on it perfectly. And, part of it is what we're talking about as far as just knowing the mechanics, like the proper mechanic, kind of like football, like know how to tackle, right? But like just know, again, how the fish move, statistically where they're going to be or where they're not going to be based on the tides, the season, the weather. but there's no replacement of actually being on the water. Again, that's why fishing guides are catching the most fish most consistently, but they're not that great just for going out there all the time. If you know any fishing guides, almost all of them will have a small network of other guides that they call when in need of help, or if they're having a tough day, like they're helping each other out. Nothing is better than real-time human-to-human correspondence, because no matter how good you are at knowing like the proper mechanics on finding good spots and using online maps and knowing how fish move, sometimes like red tides come in. Like that's been happening, more and more frequently, seems like along the Gulf Coast. And so no matter how good you are at all that map reading stuff, if you don't know about some of the real-time knowledge of exactly what's happening in a given area, you could have an awful day. But knowing that, like the human, I think the human intelligence is for me was the biggest impact to my fishing game. I was getting pretty good, and the biggest growth I ever had was a buddy of mine, Nick, just started. We decided to start fishing some tournaments. And there's a tournament series over in Melbourne, Florida, in the Indian River. And like we were pretty good. Like we were going out and like we would have days where we would catch like some legit trout, like 26 plus inch trout, every once in a while. Like it was happening every once in a while. So okay, let's do a tournament. Like sometimes some of these might win us some money. And what happened is there's usually like 40 boats, usually about 5 or 6 guides would be in those. So we're competing against guides at this point. And so like that was our goal was at least let's see if we can beat some of these guides. And what happened is that we started befriending some of the other teams. Just like us, we had corporate jobs, right? We couldn't fish at all during the week, and then most weekends we couldn't fish. So, but at least one of us, there was 4 groups, like 4 teams that we all kind of like just became friends and started sharing our information, right? So sometimes we would be able to pre-fish the tournament and the others wouldn't, and vice versa. And so we would go out there and we would just share what we saw. Like, hey, the fish were on the wind protected shorelines. Like, check those out. The redfish. The big redfish are there. The trout are on the deeper grass flats. And so then all of us would fish those same type of spots. And over time, as we got more and more comfortable with each other, we would start sharing more and more information. And by the end of it, at least one of us was on the leaderboard every single tournament. In many cases, multiple. Like, we were actually all on the leaderboard in some cases. But it was the sharing of information and real-time information that was much more important. Because before that, I literally would print out a tide sheet of every trip I fished, and like an actual graph, and I would mark on that graph where I was and then exactly when in that tide cycle I caught which fish. And thinking that was the answer. It was thinking that, okay, it's all statistics. Like I need to master the statistics part. In reality, it was the real-time human intelligence was way more valuable, to the point now where I don't do any more detailed tracking of my trips, because, January last year compared to January this year can be totally different. And the statistical data can be way off. But if you have human intelligence, especially like real-time human intelligence, nothing trumps that, because that's exactly what happened yesterday. And then just knowing the human intelligence plus how a change in weather will impact what just recently happened. Like that was the key for me to go from having some like pretty good days or having some really good days, but then having just as many bad days to like really going out and being totally confident that I'll be able to go out and catch some quality fish every trip, regardless if I'm going somewhere I've never been to before or if I'm going in my home waters. So human intelligence is shockingly valuable.
Just so happens we have an 11,000 person network of human intelligence.
Yeah, and that's why we did, and that's why it's growing. Right, that's why we did it, and that's why more and more members are going. And the fact that, and it's not, the great thing is that it's not just about like, you have to know somebody in Sebastian Inlet, Florida, or in a certain spot. Like in many cases, the trends are kind of at the macro level. Like on the big fronts moving, coming and going. Obviously, some of the localized stuff does happen, but yeah, we now have members from Texas, like all the way along the Gulf. Florida's the biggest, obviously that's where it started, but we've had members all the way up the Atlantic, up past New Jersey.
Yep. Cool. Well, guys, what we found after now coaching personally coaching tens of thousands of inshore saltwater anglers, and we have anywhere from 200,000 to 300,000 unique anglers a month on saltstream.com, millions of views on YouTube every month. And what we found is that there's only two types of anglers, just two. And the first person, I'm hoping that's not you. Actually, I know it's not you if you listen this far. They're the ones just want to do it on their own. They get some joy about just pain and suffering of just doing it trial and error. I mean, looking back, and we created this Insider Club because it's what we wish was around when we were frustrated. And it would have shaved off, I'm guessing, 5+ years. I mean, how we just spent 1 year in the Insider Club, it probably would have taken 5, if not 10 years off of the learning curve. And the first type of angler does not like that. They don't believe in shortcuts. They get weird about technology. We get some messages when we talk about technology and using online maps, there's some old salty dudes out there that hate that. They don't want anything to do with it. And we don't want to work with people like that. And I'm guessing that's not you. I'm guessing you're probably a lot like me and like Luke and Tony. And the second type of angler is us, the people who do like shortcuts, who would love to learn from people's mistakes, right? That invest in themselves and value their time. And if that's you and you want someone to help do it for you and literally shave off years of the learning curve, then join us in the Insider Club. You can even get a whole year completely for free if you go to smartfishingspots.com and pick up that system today. So that's www.smartfishingspots.com. I hope to see you there. Luke, Tony, thank you so much. I have to bolt. And guys, check you out over at smartfishingspots.com. If you're a current insider, boom, you're already getting it. It's hooked up. It's in your account right now. We out.
Ready. Headlines in less time.
Yeah, baby.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul. It was passed down to me from the days of old. Find us on the water.